Hello.
Hello.
Um, so the last couple of episodes that we've done have kind of had a relationship towards one another. We've been talking about managing negative emotions and how you can deal with that in relation to handling that internally as an individual. We've talked about it in the spirit of conversation when you're in dialogue with another person. We've brought it up in relation to how leaders function in society and what the difference between someone who can manage their negative emotions properly versus someone who can't, how that affects them as a leader. And in the last podcast that we did, the episode ended with us talking about different leaders that kind of are able to get over their negative emotions and still function successfully, lead teams well, be successful as individuals. And we started talking about people like David Goggins and Jocko Willink. And as the podcast was ending, I can't recall what is on the air and what isn't, but it got us thinking about different modes of managing negative emotions, particularly between the difference in Western philosophies towards dealing with emotions and Eastern philosophies as we understand them. And so my caveat would be, as we start to move into this conversation, is that, as we say in many of our episodes, we're not experts in any of the philosophies that we'll probably end up talking about. But again, our effort is to demonstrate, the conversations that we've picked up from other people in the world, and try to, I guess, sort out our own thoughts from just where we stand in our own lives as of now. So I thought we could kind of break out into that and see where it gets us.
Yeah, I've been thinking about the differences between the West and the East a lot, especially when you look at people like Jocko and David, because there does seem to be this pushing through the negative emotions rather than dealing with it.
Yeah, if you could, for the audience, kind of explain kind of what we think the difference is between the two ideas, between the East and West.
So I actually can't understand the Western version of this as well as I think most people, because my association with my negative emotions has been mostly, in my view, not pushing through them. I think last time we noted that there were times where I certainly did push through them.
Yeah.
But just in terms of my perception, I never had that mentality. I really had to get to the bottom of my negative emotions if I was going to move forward in life.
Should I give my perception then?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like our perceptions are actually kind of different already. But, my perception in terms of dealing with negative emotions is that when it comes to Western styles of living, regardless of the pressure that you have exerted on yourself from internal or external forces, it is your job or your responsibility as an individual to push forward in the responsibilities that you have as an individual, and to achieve to carry out those responsibilities regardless of the negative emotions that you experience. So you push through those through whether it's just, sheer grit or willpower, and that you override them and continue to move forward. Whereas it seems to me that on the Eastern way of living and in those cultures, it is you are to handle those negative emotions internally and deal with them and sort those out before you move in and around life and carrying out your responsibilities or the things that you have to do. That's kind of my basic perception between the two. Is on the Eastern side, you're supposed to find the peace, whereas on the Western side, at all costs, you move forward. I don't know if that's right. That's my perception. I'm sure someone would quickly correct me on the two, but that's how I see things so far.
Yeah. I think that there's, and I mean, to go a little bit further, it's also not like we haven't done any research. I mean, we're interested and kind of infatuated on some degree with aspects of both Western and Eastern culture. so we've done some studying. We're just not experts on this. So we're not going just based off of like perception, just kind of like in our face perception. We're going based off of what we've heard experts say and our interpretations of what they say about it. At least that's what I'm coming from. Like when I'm thinking about Western mentality, I've been consulting, for instance, A History of Western Philosophy by Bertrand Russell. My mind immediately starts to go there because to me there was a division that happens. You look at somebody like Socrates and he evokes to me he's more reminiscent, much more of Eastern thought than that concept you just described as Western thought, but he is usually considered more the father of Western thought. But if you do look at his life, at least what we knew about it and what Plato said about it, he was very deal with your emotions first. And unfortunately, he lived in an environment where people couldn't deal with their emotions, and it got him killed. And that would actually go back into what we were saying earlier, where there seems to be this, even though you're a peaceful person, people can still kind of take it any way you want, because he just asked questions, and he was on some level a rabble rouser. But it's very clear from reading the text, or at least what people said about him, that he was very good at managing his emotions, and he was around a lot of people who weren't good at managing his emotions, and that may have been what got him in some trouble. But so, I still am latching some of this on to, at least from my understanding of how those things work. So to me, there was some division there from Socrates to now, where we stopped exploring the emotional aspects so much, and maybe life in the Western world got too harsh, perhaps after the fall of Rome. Who knows what it could really be. But in terms of me and my understanding of these concepts, the issue for all like anxiety. So this relates actually to something that I was talking about with my students too, which is this word, and I knew you were going to go to it immediately: responsibility, right? And it when we're talking about free will, this is usually what we're talking about. But where my brain always goes when we're talking about responsibility is response ability, right? It's your ability to respond. Now, I understand that's not exactly what we mean when we're talking about that. Right?
Is that how the word was structured?
I have no clue. Adam, I have no clue if it was structured that way. I just think that's
it's just the
something to notice.
Prompted by you.
I think it's something to notice. The fact that is two words, response and ability, combined, except spelled differently.
Yeah, I was going to say ability is not.
Yes, right. Combined,
not
but spelled
there.
Right. So, but that ability, right? It probably has some link to ability, right? So are you responsible for that for which you can't rightly respond to? What would you say to that?
Ask me that again.
Are you responsible for that which you can't rightly respond to, or you can't reasonably respond to, or you can't let's do it this way. Actually, what the word I'm looking for is realistically. Are you responsible for that for which you can't realistically respond?
I suppose I'm looking for a measure or an aspect of control, and how much control over a particular situation that you have is, and that's going to equate with your measure of responsibility to dealing with whatever the situation or task is, and the less control that you have over that thing means the less responsibility that you have for it, is roughly what I think. Just kind of
right. So then
answering that based off of what you asked me.
Okay, so just to kind of try to reword that, then you do think that there's a relationship between the responsibility, your ability to respond to a situation, and your responsibility to do something about that thing. So, for instance, if
ability to respond,
right,
it kind of implies some metric of control, I think, or relationship to that thing.
Right. Yes. So now that we've talked about that, I can go into kind of my thoughts on, again, this idea of pushing through certain emotions. It seems practical on some level to push through certain emotions, but the problem that where I'm getting hung up on, or the entanglement for me, is, so for instance, with my anxiety and depression, I mean, anybody in the world can tell me it's something that I could push through, and I don't know how you would know that. It's something you could say. It's not something you could really prove. And so when I say I really had to figure my anxiety and depression out before I could do things when I was usually in those mindsets, I had to figure it out. I couldn't just push through it.
Right. There's an unhealthy aspect to the mindset of like push through no matter what. That doesn't solve the problem for a lot of people. That's kind of what you're driving at, is my assumption?
Yes. Yeah. So, and there may be people who can do that, right? And there are a lot of other emotions I could have pushed through. I pushed through anger at times. There's lots of emotions that I pushed through, but for me, it wasn't just it just wasn't as easy as you're feeling this emotion, push through it, right? If in that emotion you are used to locking up and shutting down, that's just what you're going to do. If you haven't trained yourself to get out of that, you have to train yourself before you can do that, so it's a matter of training. It's not just a matter of doing. That seems like that's always been my issue when we end up talking about conversations like this, and we talk about kind of like pointing out weak people. Obviously weak people exist and mentally weak people exist, and there is an aspect where they don't understand that they really do have a certain level of control over it, right? But it's also, they're in a conundrum where like it doesn't matter. Like all the practical things that you can say to them in those moments are really fruitless, because the reality is that their issue is much more deep-seated than you could possibly even understand on a surface kind of level, So, and that's usually when I'm talking to weak people, when I'm talking to weak people, my approach isn't to, unlike Jocko and David, who might just say, suck it up. It's really to kind of ask them what's going on. And just give them another brain to see if I can start helping their problems. Or, now I also run into people, and this is just a pet peeve of mine, where I start to do that and they get annoyed with me because they just want to like express their emotions, which I also understand. That was just another level of kind of like emotional therapy that I didn't understand, because to me it's like, why are we talking about this if you're not trying to solve the issue, right? That's where I would go into that David Goggins Jocko Willing mindset, where it's just like, okay, I'm willing to talk to you about your issues all day. I'm less willing to do it if you're not even looking for an answer. But for people close to me and people I care about, they're just like, I just need to talk to somebody. Obviously, I'd be willing to do that. But I prefer that approach of problem solving. I'll talk about somebody's problems all day long, even if they're not someone who is in my inner circle and that need emotional support. But for me, the caveat would be that we're talking about how to solve the problem, not just
just living in the problem.
Right. So you can go back to it, because I don't personally myself want to participate in that unless I really know you and I know, okay, you are going to get over this. This is just a small thing. You know what I mean?
I think that's the key there, that you're looking for solutions. So you're not trying to live in the hell that you currently exist in. And, I think, what you said something about, guys like Jocko might take a suck it up mentality. I don't know that that's precisely right. I think what is right is his type of leadership style would be the same as yours. Is like, okay, maybe you're having a tough time right now. You need to tap out and kind of recover your thoughts and sort yourself out. But how are you going to get back to a position where you can perform, and be good, and it be good for yourself and good for the team, rather than just like, no matter what, override those emotions. Although there's still, that element of, getting over that obstacle. But I think you probably hit the nail on the head. The work should be solution focused rather than staying wrapped in whatever the problem is. And because just talking about the problem, although it might be therapeutic, is it going to get you to a better place after those conversations happen? So I think you're kind of on the right trail there. Although neither of us are therapists or psychologists. Sort of pseudoscience.
Yeah. So, I think there's just something to that. There's something to that. And again, that's not to, when I'm talking to people, my My goal or my position is never to make people feel bad, even if they are just complaining and I'm like, I'm too busy and they're not a part of my inner circle, unfortunately. It might be to just direct them to some sources that can really do those things.
And so if I can play off that real quick, going back to responsibility, I mean, you have different circles of influence in your life, right? So you're probably more willing to work on the solutions for someone that's very close to you, like maybe a significant other, a partner that you have, or a family member. And as that social circle goes out, what you're able to do and what you're responsible for in terms of those acquaintances or friendships, that starts to dissipate a little bit. Although the help, you're still willing to offer some measure of help,
right?
But, you're hoping that, and now we're going to expand this to like societally, as that circle grows, you're hoping that responsible individuals are helping out those people inside their inner circles.
Absolutely.
Because that's where the help needs to come from and where it's going to be most effective if those inner circles are healthy.
Yes.
In other capacities.
Yeah. Me and the hypothetical person we're talking about might not have the right type of relationship where I can really communicate to them effectively. So and maybe they just need to release emotions, but I might not be, again, if I have the time and somebody needs an ear, I'm always there. It's just, I guess for me, that's where I was saying, I understand David and Jocko's mindset on that.
Yeah.
And, I don't know. I think my ability to push through my anxiety or what, I honestly don't know how people do it. I mean, that's where I am in terms of my head. I don't understand. I guess I did it. I still don't understand how I necessarily did it, but being in a position now, it's like, I don't understand. Like, I have to deal with my anxiety before I move forward. Or maybe I'm just not interested in pushing through them. Like, I don't have to. I can deal with my anxiety pretty quickly, so why wouldn't I just do it,
But you weren't always like that.
I wasn't. No. So that's the issue or the rub.
When did you become interested in the solution rather than staying tangled in your negative thoughts? Where did you start becoming solution oriented towards managing those emotions?
Yeah, probably college. Yeah, probably when I went to college and I started taking psychology classes or something. I think somewhere along that is where I learned that I didn't know how to. I didn't even know that I didn't know how to. I was literally in a fog. Like, that might be for a different podcast, but it was almost like I didn't exist. Like, I had no really self-awareness at all. I was on autopilot a lot of times, even though it might not look like that. And it wasn't until college that I really figured out, like, oh, wait, there's a lot of people that are, like, from different economic backgrounds than me that act way differently than me. And like, I never felt like I'd fit in with a lot of people at Northmont. And I think that was just part of it. It's because I came from a background where things were high stress. And so I probably seemed like a really stressed person, or I was eking it in some way. And so, or I was projecting that, either one, but that's the way that I felt. And so when I went to college, I started to note, wait, now there's people at college. Like, so maybe at high school I noticed I felt different, but it wasn't until college that I noticed people act differently than me. And I noticed that there was something to it and I couldn't figure out what it was. And then fast forward to 8 years later, 7-8 years later, I was finally like, oh, that's it. It's the emotional management thing. That's what they got. If you ask, like, how
did you discover that was it and not some other
accident? It was completely,
it just
haphazard.
dawned on you, like,
yeah,
it was
yeah,
just like a random thought, like,
yes. Yeah, a lot of pressure and research, and then just one night it just clicked.
Do you remember that moment?
At this point, no, but it was like 3-4 months ago, and it was in the middle of the night.
So this is recent.
Yeah, very recent. Yeah. So, you look at, I would study people, like, what do Warren Buffett and Bill Gates and Steve Jobs, and so what do these people have in common, right? One is they're all rich. They're all ridiculously rich. Another one is if you notice them, they seem very calm, right? Now, a lot of maybe begrudging people might look at this and say, well, obviously they're rich. What don't they have to be calm about, right? And so granted, okay, so then what do Jay-Z, Nas, 50 Cent, what do they have in common, right? Well, they didn't grow up rich, okay, but they still got it. How did they do it? You look at them, a lot of them were calmer as well. And again, they were able to support themselves through street methods to sustain themselves, right? But on some level, they had to be able to control their emotions in high tense situations. Or in high,
Is Steve Jobs known for controlling his emotions? I mean, because I'm pretty sure I remember videos of like him chucking broken pieces of technology on stage and stuff.
In the upscale, higher middle class world, yes. Or in comparison to lower class, and in comparison to how someone who grew up in the lower class social structure and has been raised around violence, right, and hasn't had a lot of time to sort out a lot of other things. Yes, if you take that person and you put them in Steve Jobs' job for a week or two, somebody might be murdered, right? Whereas something was just chucked, right? So I'm not saying he doesn't have work to do. By the way, I'm not saying that these people don't have work to do either, right? Because that was the other thing is, yes, they have those in common. And then it would baffle me when I see these. So it's just like, okay, they have money. So you're looking at rich people have money, and then they start flying off the handle, and you're like, what's up, dude? Like, or what's up, lady? Like, you're rich, you know? Like, what else could you possibly do to, like, you have all the tools you need to really control your emotions, and you can't do it still. That let me know as well, oh, there's another key that they don't even get. There's still a key here that they haven't found yet, or if they have found it, they're not telling anybody about it, you know? And so again, then you look at those people from lower economic areas, they would not have made it out of those situations. You cannot go into a fight. You cannot go into a violent situation not really being able to stay focused and on some level subconsciously being able to manage your emotions. So subconsciously they had the ability to do that. And I think that is a large part of what got them out. I'm not going to say it's not their hard work, but it's not just their hard work. Well,
the management of emotions allows them to work harder.
Yes.
In a more, it increases the utility of your hard work.
Absolutely. Yeah. It reduces the amount of energy that you have to expend, constantly dealing with emotions that you can't deal with, so you can now focus. You know, if you're on top of your emotions, you don't really have to spend as much. It's kind of like the difference between, let me think about this. It's like the difference between kind of like being on top of a hill and trying to maintain being on top of the hill as opposed to going up the hill. Like going up the hill is actually going to be a lot harder. It's still going to be hard once you get up there. You're just always going to be dealing with it, especially if things are coming at you from the top, right? But you still want to be on the top, you know? And so if you didn't get to the top at an early age, or, you know, you started low on the hill or whatever, it's going to take you a while to get to the top or whatever. And if you don't know how to stay on the top, you're going to fall down. And I think that's what happens to a lot of people. And I think that they're so rich and they're so powerful that they only fall so far down the hill and they can get back to their position. But none of them really understands how to stay up there. And I think that's what I've been talking about. And that's what I feel like I have. And I feel like I'm starting to live that life. So, you know,
being on top of the hill.
Yes. And we'll get back in 6 months and see what that looks like. But so far, it's been ridiculously amazing. Just my ability to focus and stay on top of things and do things that people seem to generally struggle to do, I think is significant or noteworthy on some level, at least for me. Like in my head, I'm like, I want to see what happens here and where this goes. But this thought process is much more reflective of Eastern thought, and that's where...
Your process.
Yes. A lot of what I learned comes from Eastern schools of thought. Some of it comes from Western because, again, we're talking about Socrates and Plato. But a lot of it came from Eastern culture when we're talking about meditation, was a vital tool, and self-reflection and reflecting on emotions. Those aren't things that I got from Western schools of thought.
You turned inward to be able to solve external problems that you experienced,
Yes.
instead of just pushing through what you were struggling with, because you found that not useful or healthy for you at all, right?
Yes, and also very admittedly difficult, and I don't think impossible, but at the time I would have said impossible.
Yeah.
It just felt impossible to me.
Well, again, that goes back to, I mean, we've discussed perception, right?
Yeah.
The reality of things. And if you perceive that a certain mode of conduct or way of acting is impossible, you're not going to achieve that conduct that you want, or that mode of conduct that you want.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So looking at Eastern schools of thought and reading on some level the Bhagavad Gita or the Vipassana and all those different meditative practices got me to the point where one night I was just contemplating on my emotions, and I noticed, like, damn, like when I focus on the sensations that my negative emotions create, like, they do not stay around long at all. Like, their half-life is just ridiculously small. And then it just clicked. It was just like, oh. And that's what everybody's kind of even saying in so many words too. But that is the thing. You just notice that, and then ever since then, it was just like, oh, well, now that I don't have my negative emotions to really deal with anymore, what's possible? And that's where it's just been like training every day, eating right every day, doing what I need to do every moment of every day. I'm always staying busy now, and it's not even difficult for me. I look forward to working out every day. I look forward to eating every day. Like, all those things are new and amazing to me, and it's just the fact that I don't have those negative emotions constantly clouding my perception of those very good things. And I think a lot of people are in that same position where we have negative feelings associated with these activities, so we don't do them. We don't, we like to eat fast food because we have positive associations with that activity, or hanging out with friends, or, drinking, right? We have positive associations with these. And I think the thing that you can really discover is it doesn't really have so much to do with innately what's in those activities. It's your frame of mind when you're doing them.
This is kind of sparking a thought in my mind about from the historical perspective between the East and the West. The East and the West have traditionally been divided culturally. I mean, that's why we refer to some cultures as Eastern cultures and other cultures as Western, right? And so I'm not assigning purpose to this. It's just making me wonder about how, human history plays out throughout time, and particularly deep time, talking about thousands of years. The Western ideas and Eastern ideas have been separated for a long time. So each kind of thought process has had time to develop stories about itself and modes of thinking and ideas about how to solve problems. And now we're in a position, after all this time of isolation, where these ideas are starting to blend together and kind of meld. And I'm wondering if we needed that time, like as a human species, to let those ideas kind of ferment in isolation, or how things would have turned out if those ideas would have been blended a long time ago. I don't know the answer to that, but it's interesting to me to think about, because now we're in the process where those things are starting to blend together. That's why we're having these conversations. And because maybe it is important to have some element of just being able to kind of storm through your negative emotions and just get done what you need to get done. But also, you probably need that aspect of learning how to deal with things internally and finding peace, so you can conduct yourself in a more useful way and feel good about yourself when you are acting in the world. I don't know, but it's interesting to think about to me.
No, so I think that there is something now that you're saying that that we need to recognize too, and this isn't to say, so I think that when we're talking about responsibility, so I think that you should absolutely learn to manage your negative emotions, but I do believe that, at least for me, my perspective, this is a personal perspective because I understand that morality is difficult and everybody kind of forms the morality differently. But for me, the highest responsibility really is like the betterment of humanity and human well-being. So now I am in the mindset where if I have to put up with some anxiety, whatever, now I'm in the mindset where it's just like, I'm responsible. Like, I'm responsible for everybody. So I am willing to do it now. Whereas before I was less willing. So my relationship to anxiety and depression changed, even though I really just don't feel those things anymore. But I would say that my relationship to like anger and a lot of other emotions changed, where I am willing to, I want to feel sadness. Like, sadness is a great thing because it usually means that I've lost something important to me. And that there was an attachment there that I want to reflect on, so I don't fear sadness at all. I fear what happened, that made me sad. But in terms of the actual feeling, that's something where I'm like, I want to feel attached to that person because I want to help their memory live on. That's my responsibility. So that's my thought then.
So what I'm hearing from you is that as you've found more internal peace within yourself and your ability to move in a more peaceful manner throughout life in terms of your responsibilities or just your personal well-being, how you live, that has given you a greater ability to actually sacrifice for others. Whereas before, you couldn't offer any element of sacrifice to contribute to other people's well-being when you were, say in your cloud, where you had no well-being and kind of internal torment. But now there's responsibility. You're able to give more to others because you've taken care of yourself.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, and that's
Is that right?
That's spot on. Yeah. I mean, so like I've always wanted what was best for everybody, and I've always had the idea. I've always been, I think probably from the age of like 19 or 20, what I would describe as a humanist, right? Mm-hmm. So I've always had that type of value, but I wasn't what I would say as good at it as I am up until recently. To me, I was pretty ineffective at it in a lot of different ways. Some people might look at me and say, well, you were pretty good at this and that way. That's great. That's not what I'm trying to talk about here. Just from my perception, though, what I really needed to do to be able to take on a large amount of responsibility was the ability to achieve internal peace when I needed it. Essentially, that has to be the spot that I can go back to. And then it's just like, okay, yes, I will put myself in this scenario for this or that person, even though I know it's going to produce probably some anxiety or this and that. Yes, absolutely. I'm willing to do that because I have this thing now, I have this thing now. And now that I have this thing, it's almost like, and I think people get in this mode of thought, and there's a reason for it. And I understand it, which is like the world owes them something. Right. And I understand that thought, but I think there is something to, and this is not, we're not talking about socialism or any type of economic system here, people. So really all that I'm saying is that there is something that only you can give yourself. And that once I figured out what that thing was and I gave it to myself, I feel so fortunate that I don't really feel like I need as much.
What was that thing?
It was that ability to achieve inner peace. Yeah. And then it's only something I can give myself because I focus on my internal. And then once that's gone, it's like, okay, now I'm good. Like now I can do stuff. Now I can help people, this and that, just recognizing that certainly you should ask for more of the people around you. And that's not what this is about, but there is a way to be satisfied with where you're at currently, recognizing that you still deserve more, and a lot of people in this country and other countries also deserve more, and that we need to help each other out, and that we need to engage with really hard moral dilemmas to help people out, and that's something that we should do, even though if you are struggling emotionally, you should go get help and this and that, but also you should spend some time like reflecting yourself and just kind of like appreciating yourself and recognize that yes, this is all on you, but that's good because like you're really the only one that can give yourself a lot of the things that you need. And that's the only way I can describe it. So again, if you learn to focus on your negative emotions, you'll see that that's true. You'll be like, oh, yeah. Because nobody can focus on the sensations that your negative emotions create in your body but you. You're the only person that can do that, which is great because then you recognize, well, that's all I really need so much. Not that you don't need this and that, but you really need that thing. You really need that thing to feel, to make this life okay and to make this life not so hellish. Which is great because then you start wanting people in your life rather than needing people in your life. And that is also an amazing thing. So, and again, that relates to more Eastern schools of thought, but the Western schools of thought is that humanism now, because what we were talking about last week was when we were talking about Eastern schools of thought, it seems more like you focus much more on the internal rather than the external. And that's where I still disagree. You got to focus on both, right? So humanism comes, not that humanism isn't in Eastern philosophy. That's not what I'm saying. But my humanism came from the West.
Right.
Focusing on the internal came from the East for me.
Yeah. So the humanistic principles that we get from the West, from the Enlightenment area, moving into like, some of our founding fathers, guys like John Locke was a humanist.
Love that guy.
Yeah, I do too. He's a cool dude.
Yeah.
We could try to get him on the podcast.
Got a shovel?
But Jesus.
Too soon?
Yeah. But the what I get from the humanistic ideas is that there's external acting in the world. You participate in what's going on in society to affect change, right? Whereas on the extreme of the Eastern side is that you ignore all the externalities, you turn totally inward. And again, maybe my Western perception has it all wrong. That could be, but you turn totally inward and ignore what is happening in the outside world. So you're no longer an actor in shaping the well-being of others. And that, to me, going that far, you're ignoring elements of the human experience in your responsibilities. I think that there has to be some measure of participation in the external world. But again, that's heavily influenced by growing up in the West and having mostly Western ideas ingrained in me.
And watching their culture through media.
Now,
right?
I will say, have you ever seen the documentary? I think it was Samsara.
I haven't, no.
Okay.
Yeah. It's like completely silent, right?
Well, there's music. I mean, there's not really any.
It's not
like dialogue.
There's no audio.
Yeah. But there's a scene where they show kind of, I don't know if the right word is, let's call them like a shaman of sorts, where they're in this very isolated village and they've totally turned inward. And so when I see that in an isolated world, I'm like, okay, maybe that has to exist in some capacity, somewhere. It's like there has to be that element to show us what that is like when it is played out and when it is demonstrated. So when I saw that scene, although I would still make the argument that you have to shape the external world some way if you have good intentions. But maybe by that individual conducting himself in that way, that does help shape the external world in some capacity. So I'm not saying that man shouldn't be doing that, but as a whole, when we're speaking in general, you've got to act in the world in some way. But I don't know.
Yeah, and I don't want to claim to know what's going on inside their heads. I see that things like that, and I think the same thing. I've thought about, going to just a Buddhist monastery, and if I really couldn't deal with this, if I really couldn't maintain some level of inner peace, that would be something I would legitimately consider. Because it's if I can't affect real change, like, yes, I'm responsible, but if I see I'm acting and not affecting some reasonable portion of change in proportion to what I'm giving up for peace, it would seem that it might make sense to leave. I don't think that that's the case, though. And I think that it's possible that some people that are in those situations are people that have been so heavily burdened by emotions that that's what they can do with their lives. That's the amount of change that they can affect, and that's okay.
Well, let me play out that thought more about the priest or shaman. I'm not sure what the right word is for what this person is doing. Or what their title would be, but maybe if I bear witness to that kind of behavior, like I'm a witness to what their mode of conduct, maybe that does shape how I behave externally. And so that maybe satisfies the requirements that we're looking for when it comes to human behavior and contributing to the well-being of others. I don't know, but it's something to think about. So maybe there's still some play there in terms of how they shape the external world by turning totally internally.
Yes.
I don't know.
So I'm going to do the slightly brave thing here, and take some time to critique, which is I do know that, at least as far as I've understood, this is from listening to people. So I'm not a practitioner of any Eastern religions. This is from listening to people who are practitioners or people who study it. But there is an element of, and this is reminiscent of some even Western religions, that suffering is part of the human experience, which is true to an extent, but really that it has to be a part, right? There's an emphasis that you keep it and hold on to it. And the idea that it's on some level immoral to try to, transform too much or to escape the
suffering.
No. Well, yes, that's on some level true. And that's an aspect I disagree with. But the other aspect is also the idea that it's actually immoral to try to change the world too much.
Mm-hmm.
And I agree with that, but I think that a lot of monks or people who practice Eastern religion have scaled it way further back than I personally agree with. Okay, so they've taken a retreatist approach almost in a way, or maybe small steps forward. Whereas I'm not going to be able to, like, some monks don't believe that you murder anything, right? And it's just like, I'm not, because, you see an 40-year-old man pointing a gun at a 10-year-old girl, and who are you to judge? And I'm like, nope, sorry, we just disagree. I judge, and I'm going to do something about it. I'm not, so that's where I happen to disagree. And I'm pretty sure I'm not defaming them, or I'm not misrepresenting. I really do think that these are aspects of their religion, beautiful aspects, obviously. This is just something that I've heard experts and practitioners say that I'm saying I disagree with that aspect. And then the same thing with, at least for China, we can talk about China and their culture. There seems to be the suffering of the individual doesn't matter so much as long as the society flourishes. And that I don't agree with. That's, again, we're back. To me, the individual and the society are connected strongly and linked strongly, and you have to treat them like that. And so that's where I'm like, nope, I'm not going there. I'm not going with that. I'm just going to suffer for the greatness of humanity. It's that my well-being and the well-being of humanity are attached to each other. And how do I take steps to maintain both fairly? That's what I'm looking for. So that's, again, why I look at, as a person who watches Western media, looking at an interpretation of the Eastern culture in China, I disagree with it. So, and again, I also think that goes to emotional management. I think that maybe they're being told to manage their emotions too much. I'm not sure. Maybe they're pushing through it. And it seems
more like suppression.
Yeah. Okay.
Which is what we've talked. Which is what we've talked about with Western thought too. Is that suppress, the negative anxieties that you have, and just do what you need to do.
Yeah.
And so maybe suppression exists, like, at the extremes of both ideologies. I don't know.
Yes. Yeah, for sure. But I think something that we've both talked about that we're both going to agree on here is that it seems to be somewhere in between. It's not in the direct middle, right? So we don't want to commit a middle ground fallacy. But for us, I think it's going to be somewhere in between. It's not going to be totally, you never suffer. You completely just zone out and focus on your emotions. So you never feel any negative emotions, right? Yeah. There are people who take that. That was when I listened to Ravi Zacharias one time. And I mean, he's, in my opinion, not the most moral person. Or he seems to be a bit of a charlatan to me. But one thing that he did say, and if this was true, he was trying to make Buddhism look bad, right? And he obviously chose an anecdotal story that did that, rather than the plenty of stories where this isn't the case. But there is a female who is trying to detach herself from her family because anything that was associated with her family, she suffered. The Buddha talks about how the attachment to things is what causes suffering. So this has caused her to retreat from her family, because to her, if she just focuses on her negative emotions and ignores her family, then when they die, she's just not going to feel anything, right? She's going, and this is a good thing. No. So that's, if that story was true, he was right. She was practicing a religion that was harming her. So is he. But that's not, I'm not interested in that. I'm not interested in that complete retreatism. I'm not interested in complete pushing through or suppressing negative emotions.
I think, sorry, did you have,
That's it.
okay. I think what we're like embedded in the spirit of our conversation right now, there's kind of two things. It's like individual well-being and societal well-being, right? And so based off of, kind of how I think generally, I might change this if I had to sit down and really write this out. But when you're thinking about individual well-being and societal well-being, because we are finite creatures, but you also have to sacrifice for the future, the people that come after you, you have to find this balance in shaping society to where the individuals who are here in the now experience some measure of well-being while also preparing to allow for the well-being of others that will come after you.
And I would even say a greater amount of well-being. And that's not something that should scare us. I just wanted to throw that in there real quick either. Like the idea, because some people are just like, well, we didn't have this during our age. And it's just like, yeah, that's usually the way progress works.
It should have been that way. Yeah.
Unfortunately, right? I get it. Yeah.
That means we're doing something.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Things are getting better as they should. So, and if that upsets you that the people after you have what you don't, then just look behind you. Okay. Like that's all you got to do is turn around. Like,
and so I think that, I don't know how you scale that, like balancing individual well-being for like this generation versus, scaling well-being societally as we move into the future. I don't know the exact balance, but I think that thought process is what you should be having when, if you're a leader, you're in a position, or you're an individual who conducts themselves in trying to shape the world. That's kind of what you have to have in mind, that in the background when you're making decisions, if that makes sense.
It does, and I think this is a good insert for John Rawls and his idea, because to me, if you want to know what proportion is fair for you to quote unquote suffer for future generations in proportion to your well-being, ask what you think was reasonable before you, right?
Okay.
So there are things where I'm just like, man, I really think that this is from a judgmental perspective, not that our generation doesn't have flaws or the next generation won't have flaws, but looking back, I see the past doing things and I'm like, you guys really could have done X, Y, and Z, and yes, you would have suffered in Y way, but you could have done it. It would have been okay. You still all would have been happy and we would be better off.
Yep.
So then I now have to ask myself that same question. I'm going to do X, Y, and Z, and it might be different for everybody. It might be different for what you have, but I try to recycle, and I haven't always done that. So these are also progression. This isn't a holier than thou conversation. This is a matter of growth and progression, but I do think about okay, so perfect example. I didn't recycle. My girlfriend is just like, hey, you should really think about this thing, right? And I could get pissy about it and mean like, I do a lot, or I could just be like, maybe it's not that hard to just do it.
I just have to put it in a different box.
Yeah, I know. I can't do it. It's too much. But, I just did it. I try to lower my beef intake, and I'm always looking for the next thing, and that's just for me. And everybody's kind of doing their own thing, but I always ask, what can I forego? What do I feel comfortable? And that's the other thing too, is you become more introspective rather than outrospective. I did just whatever. I just looked at people in the past and I was just like, why didn't you do these things? And I also want to caveat that I don't know what people were going through in the past. And I'm not really interested in getting hung up on it. So even though it maybe sounded like that for a second, I don't really care. I'm not interested in judging people of the past. We are past the past, and I love them, and I wish them all well. That being said, I guess for me, I look at myself, and it's just like, okay, now what do I do? I'm not gonna be the one. I'm not gonna be the hypocrite, So how do I live my life? Okay, well, I'm going to do these things that I'm always hearing so much about that people say you should do. And I'm really just kind of try to do them to the fullest.
Hmm.
And then what else is there really, apart from that? So, yeah, I mean, I guess that's just kind of like my views on everything and an amalgamation of the Eastern versus Western thought, and recognizing, I think, that it is possible. That for the longest time, I thought the reason that I struggled so much in life was because I didn't think it was possible. I didn't think this idea of balance was possible, and that idea was insufferable to me. I couldn't live that life. That was a very dangerous path that I was down.
Mm-hmm.
Luckily, I live in a, thank whatever thing possibly created this universe, that is not the case. That you actually don't have to sacrifice yourself for the greater, and you don't have to sacrifice the greater for the self. That there is a pretty beautiful balance that you can find, and that once we all figure that out, we'll all feel very fortunate to be here, and especially being part of a collective where we can help other people and really be connected. Like, something amazing is freaking happening here, and like we can really be a part and connected to that. And I think we're figuring it out, and I'm excited about that.
But there still exists. So what you're talking about, kind of everyone rising to that same occasion, which maybe more people are becoming more aware of these kind of ideas and taking them to heart. But until that becomes more equalized, the burden continues to be placed on you now because of your awareness and your willingness to sacrifice. So your sacrifice is always going to be greater until more people start adopting these ideas.
Yeah.
And so you might have found more peace, but your burden got greater.
Yeah.
Because you are in control of yourself and you are aware of what you have to do in the external environment world.
Yeah, and
in my opinion.
No, in my opinion too. And I agree with that too. I agree with that. That's not also to say that I don't have boundaries and that people can push them. I've already decided. I think we had this conversation last week, so I won't go too far, but it's something I got caught up on, where it's just like, I feel like I'm giving something to people and that people either don't want it or they're confused by it. And that made me initially try to push harder because I felt responsible to make sure people understood this so that their lives could be better.
Right.
And when it didn't work, I had a decision. I had to decide, like, is this something you're just going to keep making yourself miserable to do, even though people aren't listening? Or are you going to accept that maybe it's not your responsibility so much on this? Like, you've said what you need to say, and you've said it in such a way that you feel is sufficient for enough people to grab on. And if they don't, they're now responsible. I've said what I need to say. I've said the thing that I think will help everybody out there live this life to the fullest and do all the things that they want to do that they can't. Apart from saying that, and maybe bringing it up every once in a while to the point where I don't annoy people, because I've also annoyed people with it. What else is my responsibility? Well, so that's where I push responsibility away, and I say, no, I'm not going to take that. So
what you've said's kind of prompted me to think about someone like Bernie Sanders. He's not the gold standard for this example in particular, but the reason why I'm bringing him up is because if you look back at him, a lot of his messages have been the same throughout a very long amount of time, right? So he's been putting out some of these ideas, and it's taken the culture, or let's call it the spirit of the age, to catch up with him, right? So I don't think that it is fruitless or futile to expound on an idea that you have if it's something that you want to share with people. If people don't want to hear it or they're not ready to hear it, then that's one thing, but to hold it back or not share because you think no one will listen, that's not going to be useful either.
Yeah.
And it might make, if you are lucky enough to be right, or you've thought out your ideas so well that they do tap into some kind of nerve, in time, if the culture or people catch up with those ideas, your message will be more powerful because you've been thinking about it for a while and trying to play it out rather than just letting it sit somewhere.
Yeah, I agree with that. I guess just for me, it was just recognizing that it's not like okay, so I have this ability to control my negative emotions, so I'm just willing to take on any burden I need to save and do whatever humanity needs me to do. I don't think that's fair either. And so for instance, like the whole like continuing to talk about my idea, like again, I'll continue to talk about it. But I think that there is an aspect of all this that in order to make a new idea or to flesh a new idea out, to manifest it in a way that people can latch onto it, that takes time from me, right? That's time that I'm not making money. That's time I'm not working out. I usually tend to just do those things anyway, but that's time I'm not making money. Let me say that, because I can always make more money. Okay. That's time I'm not making money. That would make me happier. Right. So I have no idea how tomorrow is going to take it. All I can look at really is today. So if people aren't taking it today, even though I think that it was worthy, right, it doesn't upset me. It's just like, that's the way it is, right? Yeah. If it turns out that it is actually helpful to them and they don't know it, I'm not going to shove it down anybody's throat. That's, I guess, my point. It's like, I'm past that mentality.
And that would be counterproductive.
Yes. Yeah, and it really would, right? I might get it down some throats, but to me, I don't want my arm to get covered in slobber, I guess, or if we're going to follow the metaphor out in any useful way. Like, I'm not going to burden myself heavily to shove it down somebody's throat. Yeah. Either you're going to be ready to take it or you're just not going to get it. And either one is fine with me at this point. You know what I mean? So I guess that was my point, is I'll continue to talk about this idea or whatever. I think that there's just an aspect where it just has to do with me. I think if in 6 months from now I'm looking great, right? And if everybody's looking at me live my life and they're like, damn, how does that dude do it? Then they will start to listen. And that's unfortunately just an aspect of rhetoric. People tend to go off of rhetoric. I'm just a dude named Quayd from Dayton, Ohio, right? Whereas if you see some, it's kind of like, and I get this too, and this makes sense. I don't tend to think this way, which is why I don't understand it. But I understand how other people think this way and why they do. It's kind of like the don't tell me, show me thing. Or whatever. Like, yeah. So I've told people now I really have to show them, which is the fun part for me anyway. So, but if at any point along the way, somebody comes up and they're just like, well, do you have any suggestions about life? And they're getting in my face about it. I'm like, yes, I do. And I've been saying it. And if you didn't get it, then I've already said it. I don't know what else I can do, but you can't throw it in my face that I'm not trying to help you out when I was. Like, I did.
The message has to match the messenger, right?
Yeah, and I think that that's something too, because I was talking to Cassandra about the fact that, like, that's kind of the way language works or whatever. And I understand that maybe I haven't described everything the best ways in the past before too, and I get that too. But I think at this point you get it now, right? Like, focusing on the sensations, right? It's pretty straightforward. You know what I mean?
So, it's not intuitive, though.
Yeah.
In my opinion, it is not intuitive.
Yeah.
If you're not brought up thinking that way.
Right. Well, I wasn't brought up thinking that way either. And that's, again, part of me is just looking like, nope, anybody can. There's nothing special about me. There's nothing. That's like, I'm fine with talking about my time in meditation or my practice in meditation and all those things. Just the fact that I was obsessed for so long and I did a lot of research. Okay. That all started when I was like 23. It's only been like 7 or 8 years, which is really not that much time. Like, I'm a nobody.
Again, you've just caused someone to totally panic because you're talking. It's like, I just spent a decade almost figuring this.
No, it wasn't even a decade. It was 23, and I really didn't even pick up steam until maybe 5 or 6 years ago. And what I'm telling you, and what I've said before, is that there are things that I didn't understand that I could have understood on day one.
Yeah.
That I just didn't understand, that would have put me up light speeds. And that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about techniques that really catch you up in terms of practices that really help you navigate life way better, essentially. And I was just trying to de-emphasize myself. This is not a me thing. This is not something special about me. I don't have special genetics. I grew up not being good at sports, not being athletic. I barely graduated high school. Okay.
For real?
I graduated with a 1.8. Open disclosure, people. This dude right here.
Turn the podcast off.
This dude right here who just sounds like they really have, at least sounds like it. Sounds like they have their stuff together. Sounds like they figured out some stuff. Didn't grow up with any special abilities. I barely graduated. Graduated high school with a 1.8. Failed my first semester of college and didn't start figuring out how to learn until after that point. You know? So I'm not some savant. I'm not some young prodigy or whatever. Like, so if watch me develop first, if that means anything to you, okay? I just hope it doesn't. I hope there are people that catch on early, because I just want people to be better, you know? So it's just like, if it takes you 6 months to figure out that this thing actually works, that's 6 months that you could have been doing the thing and weren't, I guess is the way that my mind works. So, it's just the practice. It has nothing to do with me. It is just the practice of every day trying to focus on the sensations that your negative emotions create around certain activities until you do those activities flawlessly or, you know, pretty perfectly. Like my workout routines are ridiculous now. I'm very good at staying concentrated on the muscles, and that's what I'm doing the whole time. Am I having negative emotions? Oh, something negative happened. Where is it in my body? Okay, it's gone. Keep lifting. It's just all there. And then by the end of the workout, my muscles are just, they're like tight and like it's the best workout I've ever had up to this point. That technique did more for me in working out and all the other things I do than any exercise I've learned, any exercise watching it on YouTube. So anyway, that's my long drawn out pitch on my thing. I apologize for that, but you know, that is a culmination though of my studies in Western and Eastern culture. That is the thing.
Result, yeah.
Yes, I think that is the thing that kind of unified both of those spheres of thought. I think we were all kind of like bumbling towards that idea that we really needed to get our negative emotions together, and because it like dawned on me. But it didn't dawn on me because of me. It dawned on me because I was watching so many other people try to figure it out as well. A lot of smart people, everybody in between. Everybody seems to be trying to figure it out, right? And I was just paying attention to everybody and looking. So I was inspired by people, you know, to figure out what was going on. And I think that's the thing. And I think that's what can help. And I think that's where the West and the East come together for me in my mind. So that's my ramble.
Anything else you want to cover?
Nah, that's it, man. That's it for me.
I think me too.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for listening. I do want, I've said this before, but I'm going to say it again. I want engagement, any engagement that you're comfortable with. You can email us at currencyofdiscourse@gmail.com. Any questions you have? We're not always sure what we want to do on the show. So if you have an idea or we like talking to people. So even if you just want to talk, reach out to us and start a dialogue. And we'll talk about what you want to talk about. And we are talking about plans to kind of branch this thing out. We still want to bring people on the show, but we are trying to get people involved in this conversation in as many ways as we possibly can. And so you can all look for that. And if you're interested in that, please engage with us in any way that you feel comfortable with.
Yep.
All right. Have a nice night.